Now you see the first photo, which is from the conference 1973. It was the 50th anniversary of Mohenjo-Daro in Mohenjo-Daro itself. It was the beginning of a big campaign which was initiated by Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto, namely the UNESCO campaign for saving Mohenjo-Daro, which started 1979 and lasted until 1997 when it was winded up. I will give you at first a short introduction to what the minister was mentioning yesterday, namely at the moment, and this seems to be for me a very important part, the development of a digital data bank on all sites in Sindh which are part of your cultural tradition. And as we know, as scientists, we are talking about individual sites. We have had wonderful papers yesterday. But it's also the question of heritage management, of infrastructure, of maintenance, of many, many problems involved with what we call the cultural heritage of a country. Up to now, more than 300 sites have been registered. You see here a map. This is a digital map. Whenever you click on one of the icons, then the information about the sites are coming. And we hope to complete this list till next year, March, by about 1,200 registrations. Here is one example. It is Makli. Makli has been documented by Yasmin Lari, and this data bank is executed by the Heritage Foundation for the government of Sindh, for the Ministry of Culture. So the idea behind is, with modern technology, with registration of coordinates, with a GIS, to collect information or at first for the management of the sites, which is very important, protection by law. And you know that after the 18th Amendment with the decentralization to the provinces, there is a need of the day of developing capacity building in all the provinces, not only Sindh, to deal with the extremely rich property of your country. And you see on the right side, you see icons around a monument. The photos are taken with GPS cameras, which are registered in Google. So you can go in the Google map, you click the icon, and the information about the site is coming. So just that as a short comment on heritage management, which is needed in addition to the scientific research we are doing. You see now here Makli, and Dr. Lashari will talk about that later, near Jam Nizamuddin, with the documentation, which also is needed for UNESCO. You know, Makli and Mohenjo-Daro are both World Heritage Sites. And to be very honest, I was the reactive monitoring expert for UNESCO and ICOMOS. There is a high probability that at least Makli will be put on the red list, endangered. And if not more work is done for the saving of Mohenjo-Daro, Mohenjo-Daro might have the same problem. Now, my actual topic of this morning is the former Orbis Mohenjo-Daro, the urban form. Questions of how was Mohenjo-Daro built, how is the urban conception of this city in the Indus. Again, let me give a short comment on what also has been discussed yesterday. We have in the 3rd millennium the 3 earliest civilizations of the world in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Indus Valley. And the fascination for the Indus Valley Civilization appears once you do a comparative study with the other civilizations. And as you are aware, it's per definitionem, civilization is a culture which has developed the writing, and therefore it is for the 3rd millennium only Mesopotamia with the cuneiform writing, Egypt with the hieroglyphs, and Indus Valley with the pictograms, as we call them, which, as we all know, have not yet been deciphered. At least none of the systems, Ascoparpola, Mahadevan, many more, none of them has been officially accepted. If we go into a system of asking what is culture, we can reduce it in a rather simple way and say culture is energy. Energy is expressed in the German word Macht, which is something like power. Power is the basis for interaction. Interaction reflects the potentials of power. Architecture is a reflection of interaction. And you have been seeing yesterday, especially with this wonderful presentation of Mark, we would have in Mesopotamia the dynastic period, and we would have in the Indus Valley the development of the Indus civilization. I cannot go into detail about the appearance of the Indus Valley civilization, but we know that Wheeler, and this will be important for understanding Mohenjo-Daro, said that this was an outcrop, a kind of transfer of conception from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, and of course proved by Jarish and Mark in his work in Harappa. We know that this is not the case at all anymore. But the traditional interpretation, starting with the naming of the priest king, continuing with the terminology of citadel and lower city, comes from the interpretation of the 60s of Wheeler, who very strongly influenced the whole interpretative level of the Indus Valley civilization. Now, what I want to show you with Mohenjo-Daro is that Mohenjo-Daro, of course, only can be understood once we go into the valley itself. And here, of course, we have the Indus, so I will give you some facts about the Indus, but we also have to see that we are talking about a twin river system, as yesterday has been shown in the presentation, where we have the Gagahakra as a secondary river system further east. In its ending, we have Dolavira, and parallel to that with the Indus, which is much more complex and much more dangerous in the annual behavior of the river system with inundations on the more western side on which Mohenjo-Daro is situated. Here we have a satellite map. And you see the complexity of the meandrating system of the Indus itself. And we have to understand that around 1870 only, the British, after they had conquered Sindh, have been placing the Indus in bunds, in damming it, to avoid inundation of the areas which were used for agriculture. And we know in 1900, around 30, Sakar barrage was constructed, where we since then have had the largest irrigated area of the earth. That means what we have today is an artificial behavior of the Indus, and we know before 1870, every year the whole lower Sindh was under water. Very important to understand. Here you see two satellite images from 2010. I was asked by UNESCO to do a mission on the damage assessment after the floods. You know, there was this big flood in 2010. And you see in the lower satellite image, the blue, which is showing the lower part of the Indus after Sakar barrage. You can very nicely see the narrow kind of gauge where the water is spilling out in the what we call the Western Nara, ending up in Lake Banchar, and otherwise the whole Indus bed from one dam to another one, or bund, full of water, and it was only a question of another 50 centimeters in 2010, and Mohenjo-Daro would have been completely flooded. So, the tradition of at least Lower Sindh, and here we know that from the Panjnad south, the Indus has a complete different behavior of sedimental deposits. You don't have that in Harappa. That's the reason why you still have the graves on the surface. You will not find them in Mohenjo-Daro because, as I will prove, they are about 7 to 8 meters at least under the present surface of the lower Indus plain, which has been silted up by the Indus. So the traditional behavior of the people in Sindh is to live with the water. And the conception that we have the damming and the dam is breaches and 20,000 villages are underwater is only due to the fact that since 1870 people started to settle in areas where they normally never would have been settling because they were annually flooded. Here you see some photos from 2010 where the people near Mohenjo-daro from the villages have left their houses. You see houses underwater within the bunds. So this actually was till 1870 the normal behavior and problem in Sindh. Now this sketch map shows you the two river systems, the Indus River and parallel to it, the Gagahakra, where we have Kalibangan, where Rafiq found a lot of sites in the Bahawalpur area, and of course where in the ending of this, in the little and big run of Kutch, you have Dolavira, you have Sokotada, then on Gujarat, you have Lothal, which was excavated by Rao, and so on. So you see that primarily the Indus settlemental behavior is along water systems, and that is very important to understand the phenomenon of Mohenjo-daro. Now I give you one short introduction to or look into the pattern, the traditional interpretation since martial was that we have a western higher area which later on was called by Wheeler Citadel and the lower eastern area, and you have the first map of Mohenjo-daro published 1931, the so-called Francis map. You still see that Munir area in the lower city is not yet excavated, and you see it in the map on the right where Munir 1934 did another excavation which even today we cannot study because the maps have been lost. And you see on the bottom left Dolavira, and here latest since then, but it was already clear with Surkotada that this pattern of a western higher citadel at a lower eastern town is not necessarily the standard city plan for the Indus Valley sites. Here, two satellite photographs. The left one is 1925, and we found out that the British, with the Francis map published in Marshall, already used aerial photogrammetry for the documentation of the site. You see this wonderful photo, and I don't have a, do we have a pointer? No. You see in the citadel, the black area to the west, dark. This is a vegetation pattern, and this, as we know today, clearly marks subsoil structures, mud brick platforms, mud brick walls, which are limiting the site and where the vegetation could not penetrate. That is why the shrubs and the plants are in the colluvial part of the erosion structure of a gigantic citadel. So on the left, 1925, and on the right, the satellite image of today, and you see the patterns have remained more or less the same. Another interesting part for studies of Mohenjo-daro is, and for other sites, is the geobotanic relation as such. Now with the studies we did in the 80s with Massimo Vidala, with the Italians, with Mark, we identified the surface as something very, very precious. The red areas are areas which are highly sensitive. Workshops were found where the drilling of beads were carried out. We found micro drills, only a few centimeters big. And therefore, these areas, and not only the excavated areas, have to be protected. But you also see that, at least from that what we see today, only a fraction has been excavated. And that's our argument with Mohenjo-daro and UNESCO regarding the authenticity, that even if the structures which are exposed since many, many years are suffering by salts, by people, by animals, whatever it is, at least 90% of the archaeological information still remains protected in the unexcavated area for the future. And here we have, of course, a gigantic information of archaeological wealth which has to be exploited in the future. Here again, the surface of Mohenjo-daro. You see this black line around. This black line around is the collector drain for the UNESCO project of lowering the groundwater table. I don't want to go into these details, but when they constructed this drain around Mohenjo-daro, 1983, more than 27 drillings were done, And these drillings we have as geological profiles, which I will show you. I don't go into the history of the excavations. I was very impressed by the charts of Nilofer showing whatever happened where, but we are starting now more and more to look into the history of the history. And here you see, of course, that after World War II, and the last real excavation was done by Dales, 64, 65, that since then non-destructive archaeological surveys have been done, but I think it's the need of the day to continue with new research. Here you see the citadel. We did this documentation with hot air balloon. I will comment shortly on the stupa, and everybody is used to know that this is Kushana. Recent research also by our Italian colleagues, Giovanni Verardi, our Buddhist expert, clearly showed that the stupa is not a Buddhist structure. And here we come to monumentality in architecture for the, thank you very much, for the Indus Valley Civilization. So have a look at it. You have this structure. The basic argument of Verardi and also us is that this is interpreted as the monastery where the monks were living, and in the middle you have the stupa. And this, whoever is familiar with Buddhist architecture, never is the case. You have the stupa always separate from the residential area, and also a closer survey around does not show any Kushana pottery. But again, that's another thing. So, monumentality in architecture in Indus Valley, we have this enormously elevated area of the so-called citadel with this structure, which needs new investigation and new research. Is it third millennium? Is it first century, second century AD? We protected, and this was a demand by Benazir Bhutto, we protected the original mud brick core in 1995 with a protective cover. So what you see today is a sacrificial layer of modern clay, separated by geotextiles, and inside we have the original mud core, and there might be chances with C14 dating to investigate into these structures to prove their age. So the first years of Mohenjo-Daro, which were analyzed by Banerjee, tried to prove that this is Kushana, stupa, post-Alexandrian structure. He wrote a report to Marshall, which Marshall refused, 1924, and then it was published a few years ago by his family under Mohenjo-Daro, a forgotten report. And here we have all the photographs for this report, and we can clearly see whatever declares to be Kushana, Buddhist, definitely is Harappan. Monumentality, again, with these structures, I don't go into detail, but I just want to raise some new questions in relation to the traditional interpretation. Monumentality also in the lower architecture. So what we have, and here we have the difference to Mesopotamia and Egypt. We seem to have a decentralized power system with large houses. This is DKG South. Everybody knows the chief house. It was mentioned yesterday. But we also have other structures. This is HR area. Massimo Vidala has commented on this house here, which is a mini great bath. We have small houses here. We have a very large house, 800 square meters here. That means if we interpret architecture as a direct interpretative source, we have in the city plan mixture of large size and small size, like ring systems, which would point not to a centralized power system. But again, this question is hardly discussed and hardly analyzed. Regarding power, monumentality, the largest figure we have is the priest king, 15 centimeters. Mark talked about the microbeads yesterday. The seals are not more than 5-6 centimeters. If you go to Mesopotamia and Egypt, you have a complete different behavior in relation to the expression of power. Now we go into the forma orbis again. Here we have a 3D view of Mohenjo-Daro with the citadel in the west and the lower city. And it's quite interesting to remark that the priest king was found in this area, DKB, far away from the citadel. And now again, combining power structures. If the citadel would have been the seat of the elite, there should have been concentration of seals, figurines, or whatever is expressed as sacred, ritualistic, or power structures. Not at all. We have in the citadel less seals than in the lower city, less figurines than in the lower city. So something which we are not able to bring together for a logic interpretation system in relation to sacred and profane elite power structures. I'll just give you a short comment on Wheeler's deep dig 1950. This is the what he called the granary, and here outside he did a deep trench. Here you see the map of the granary with the loading platform with wells in front, clearly showing that this was not a loading platform and his deep digging was here. You see he is going down more than 7 meters. You see an earlier structure here, and you see the collapse due to the groundwater. This is 47 meters above mean sea level. We are here 40 meters, and you see how low the water table was in those days. But you also see that the anthropogenic material goes down to at least 7 meters below the surface. Here you see the surface of today. So what we do understand today is that for the last 4,500 years from here, where is the ancient surface of the site, the Indus has silted up for more than 7 meters the whole plain around Mohenjo-Daro, and that is what we say. We only see the tip of the iceberg today. This is the demand of UNESCO. I will come to this later. They want to know how big Mohenjo-Daro is as a World Heritage Site, needs to identify its core and buffer zone. We do not at all know how big, how large Mohenjo-Daro is. I'll give you some other sources, and most of them are unpublished. This is the excavation of George Dales, and Mark, as a young student, was involved in that. Dales, 1965, was looking in this area for the harbor of Mohenjo-Daro. But also George Dales did not yet understand, as Wheeler did, the relation between the ancient surface of Mohenjo-Daro, the surrounding, and the modern one. So he was making a deep dig here. This material is mostly unpublished. You see his excavation here, Dales area. We called it University of Pennsylvania excavation, or Dales area. You see the hot air balloon photograph, and this is Dales area. So the difference of height between, this is a street he found actually, and this street in HR area, the difference of height is at least 8 meters. And what he could show is that this street is contemporary to the upper one. And this goes against Mackay's interpretation of slab stratigraphy, that horizontal layers are identified for the stratigraphic interpretation of Mohenjo-Daro. Completely wrong, useless, and that is our big problem also in relation to the dating of seals, figurines, and pottery, because the stratigraphy of Mohenjo-Daro is much more complex, and we can not say up to today which seals are belonging to a specific period. And there must have been changes between 2500 and 1900, over 500 years in the development of depiction, writing, and whatever you are thinking of. So this is Dale's excavation. We documented his architecture in 1979. And I remember with Mark, when you were sitting in Shahid and Millard Road and documenting all the pottery from the 65 excavation, where George, and you did this wonderful publication on the pottery with George, which gave the stratigraphic. So this is the hot air balloon documentation of the excavation of Dales. You see one of these streets he excavated, and here you see in the plain, it's 47 meters AMSL. Wonderful drain. Look at the very sharp bricks, highest quality. This is mature Harappan period. So this is another information system we need for the former Orbis. Here is the drain around Mohenjo-Daro, and you see 27 wells where we have the logs, the drilling profiles. This is a drilling which George Dales did inside the site, and this is another drilling outside. So we have plenty of information on the underground extent of the site. I don't go into detail. These are different drill logs which are important to interpret. You see 1983, this is still West Pakistan, a little bit late for that, and the drilling profile of Wabda, and you see on 20 feet below surface, this is the log. Bricks, pottery remains, and so on. These phenomena we have all around Mohenjo-Daro, and that means, I don't go into detail, but you see we have plenty of data. That means that the anthropogenic extent of Mohenjo-Daro in the vertical direction goes quite deep. And this is fitting with the observation of Wheeler's trench of the building up. So this is the old ancient surface here, and that's where we are today. So more than 7 meters have been silted up by the Indus system itself. So here we have again the citadel area, Wheeler's excavation, and what we did to prove Wheeler's observation, we did testing all around the citadel, and you see this is a sketch, this material is unpublished, and we did about 30-40 strippings with Ute Franke. Here you see one of the strippings, and here you have the mud brick retaining wall. So the whole citadel is based on this ring system, mud brick 6 meters wide, which cannot be penetrated by the roots of the plants, and that is why in the aerial photographs you see this line. And we did drilling with Karachi, geophysical service, whole publications on that, and the drilling with Dr. Balista showed, you see here the drilling profiles, the anthropogenic material underground. There was done a geophysical survey between the citadel area and the lower city, which clearly proves that there are no structures between the citadel area and the lower city, and in addition, Karachi could prove that here in this line, south of VS area, no, I'm sorry, that's the other one, south of HR area, there is another gigantic mud brick platform. So everything points towards different. You see the results with the electric resistivity area. So this is no reaction in this part. The moment you come to the DKG area, you have a high indication of structures underground. The last proof. In 1986, the spurs were constructed in Mohenjo-Daro by UNESCO, 6 million euro. And here you see 4 meters under the surface, you see the heavy machinery. You see in the trench the remains of Mohenjo-Daro. This is 1.5 kilometers away from the center of Mohenjo-Daro, close to the Indus, full of urban remains, wells, streets, you see here. And these are the spurs for the protection of Mohenjo-Daro, and we are here, and we are far away from the city, and the city continues underground. So major parts of the city have been covered by the Indus system, and you see different disturbances when they constructed the drain around Mohenjo-Daro. This deviation here was due to a huge deposit of architecture here. Huge deposits there, disturbances. So that means what we have is most probably a city constructed on elevated ground, maybe partly on natural. I showed you that in former days, before 1870, Lower Sindh was every year underwater. This is why the historic cities are all on elevated ground, and that Mohenjo-Daro, as it seems, was a kind of semi-amphibious city which was constructed into the Indus. The question is why? And here we come to another very important observation. We have here another observation which will show you why this was done. And here we come now to a most recent program. I have been informed by the Ministry of Culture that next month they will fulfill the demand of UNESCO. Here you see a drilling device of Karachi. There will be drillings in Mohenjo-Daro to check the extent of Mohenjo-Daro and to prove how big the site is. And you see, this is Mohenjo-Daro. Now the satellite image, you see the spurs constructed by UNESCO. You see the ring well around Mohenjo-Daro. And these white lines, are the indication where the drilling has to take place, and most probably, this is the airport here, and most probably Mohenjo-Daro will have at least 3 times the size we know today. At the moment we have about 100 hectares, it could be easily 300 hectares, and of course the question is, what is the relation between the higher and the lower parts? Are these suburbs? Is this continuous occupation? All these are questions which are open. Mohenjo-Daro, in the middle of a huge alluvial system, we see here the Rory Hills, yes, where we had this Paleolithic up to Neolithic material. I have to admit, when they constructed the spurs of Mohenjo-Daro, hundreds of tons of stones were taken from the Rory Hills, and in saving Mohenjo-Daro, that's what Jarish always said, they have destroyed a lot of archaeological indication on the Rory Hills, which may be even at least as important as Mohenjo-Daro itself. I mean, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of the Rory Hills, and you see Mohenjo-Daro, there is Merga, there is a Quetta up here. That means we are very close to the trade route on the Bolan Pass, coming down to Mohenjo-Daro, going to Kirta, to understand this whole ecological system. And you see that it's in the middle of the alluvial plain. Now, what we say today, Child has identified the Neolithic revolution around 8,000, the change from food, from collection and hunting to farming and cattle breeding. The 3rd millennium, the urban revolution, and we have in the 3rd millennium the transport revolution. The phenomenon of the early civilizations is primarily based on the change from land transport to water transport. Only with this facility of transporting during the summer times where the Indus was inundating everything, they were able to communicate with Harappa, 600 kilometers. A bullock cart may have 3 kilometers per hour. You never would have been able to communicate in this gigantic system of the Indus without the use of the boat as a new means of systematic transport. It was known much earlier, but it was not implemented as a system itself. And you see the old seal with the boat, and yesterday somebody said, I think it was Hamida, that we have with the Muhammads one of the very ancient remains, hardly studied. Nobody took care of them. 15 years ago, all the boats were destroyed because there were the dacoits, and nowadays only some rudiments are living in Mancha Lake and close to Sakar, but near Mohenjo-Daro you will hardly find them. Well, this is a short view on the Forma Orbis conception. They went to the Indus because they needed the transport, and they were very close to it. The result was a new technology, at least for Mohenjo-Daro. Harappa is definitely quite different. But with this, they had the facilities not only to communicate within this gigantic system, I would call it of a river civilization. And from there to Saurashtra, Gujarat, Makran coast, Oman, as we have been seeing, and this enabled them to develop a gigantic system, not only of control, but exchange whatever it was. I was a few weeks ago in Kabul, and I found a seal in the market. We have Badakhshan, a Shortu guy, quite in the north of Afghanistan. We don't understand this phenomenon. Pure Harappan, where the lapis lazuli was coming from. One more question to be solved, with 400-500 kilometers and no interconnection. And as Mark showed, Oman, we have Salud, where we have Umanar graves in Salud. And this Umanar grave also has a well in the middle, 2500 BC. Up to now, only the Indus Valley Civilization had these ring wells, not in Mesopotamia, not in Egypt, but they are surprisingly in this Umanar system in Salud, where a seal was found. Mark has a photograph of it, but he didn't show it yesterday. So here we see what an enormous potential lies behind this Indus Valley system, also in relation to neighborhood. And my personal view, I think Mohenjo-Daro was the very center of it. Thank you very much.